issue. Another really easy issue to tackle, Wall Street reform. Congress and President Obama signed reform legislation, which Mr. Miller supported, that will reform the way our financial systems operate, create a consumer bureau inside to help protect consumers from credit card and other kinds of fraud. The Republicans have characterized it as overbroad and too intrusive. What is your position, Mr. Tubbs, on this reform, this Wall Street reform legislation?
Sure. On the campaign trail, as well as taking care of my family, I haven't had time to read that 2,000-page bill. I do know that as I talk to the constituents in our district as I go out there, I know that they are having a hard time growing their businesses, growing jobs in the community because of the economic downturn we're in, but also because of the uncertainty that the Congress and the government is putting into the future, whether it's the health care bill, how much it's going to cost us, whether it's cap and trade, how much it's going to cost us. Now with this new financial reform, people don't understand, including me, what it's going to do. It creates that uncertainty out there to prevent them from taking the risk and growing. I wish I had the time to read 2,000 pages before I voted on it. But I'm going to tell you right now that I am not seeing an immediate releasing of the credit out there. I'm still hearing complaints of I can't get loans to grow my business. And if this 2,000-page bill somehow addresses the problems that we have out there, great, I applaud them. I just am concerned that when you write that many pages of more government control, it's more inefficiency into the system, and it's not in the end going to help us.
So Mr. Tubbs says this may not help us.
This is a very important piece of this is a very important piece of legislation. It's the most important financial reforms probably in 30 years. And the point is, for the first time, banks and credit card companies will not be able to arbitrarily change people's interest rates, to charge them penalties, to charge them outrageous costs for overdrafts. But more importantly, it goes to the question of whether or not you're going to have regulation on Wall Street. We saw the greatest financial collapse in this country since the recession, since the Great Depression. And why did that happen? Because the banks engaged in almost essentially criminal behavior in the risk that they assumed on behalf of the American people. And then it became too big to fail. So what we're doing is reining them in. And if you don't, now I know the Republican Party says they want to go back to exactly the way it was before. Under Bush, there was no regulation of Wall Street. They created phony companies to take the risk off the books. There was no transparency, and that's what has to be changed. Otherwise, you're just going to, once again, take the middle class down. Middle class Americans, because of the behavior on Wall Street and the scandals that this bill addresses, the behavior took away people's pensions, it took away the value in their homes, it took away their jobs. What we're seeing today is a result of those Wall Street scandals, and those scandals were winked and nodded at by the Bush administration. And the collapse happened before Barack Obama ever became president of the United States. And now they want to insist that somehow this is the problem. The problem is the scandals. The problem is what it did to the economy. But you know, the Republicans won't vote to regulate the credit card companies. The Republicans won't vote to force the banks to lend to small businesses. The Republicans won't vote on SBA loans to help businesses. So it's interesting that they keep saying the problem is uncertainty. You want to try uncertainty in Washington and the rest of the world? Get rid of Wall Street reform and see what happens to the financial markets. When they did want to deal with the financial reform, the day they voted no, the stock market went down 600 points. They want to talk about uncertainty? Try digesting that.
And Lisa, I don't want to be misconstrued here. I certainly don't disagree with good and smart regulation.
You haven't read the bill, so you don't know whether it's good or smart or not, apparently.
Correct. Yeah, and I will agree with you there. It's uncertainty.
But you think it's the cause of all the uncertainty in the country?
Oh, no. I think the health care bill, the cap and trade, the things I went over, and a 2,000-page bill that people don't understand causes uncertainty. But when you talk about the 1999 repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, which you voted against, I applaud you on, was done by a Republican Congress and signed by a Democratic president. That started this, among other things. You had other congressmen yelling, trying to stop some of the things that were happening in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in 2001, 2003, 2005, 2006. But they were shouted down by the Democrats out there. And I blame the Republicans because they didn't stand up and make it happen.
When did banks get to make no documentary loans, no income
loans? Right, I thought that was crazy. I remember buying my house in 2000.
That was allowed.
Right, and I disagree with that. I would agree with regulating that. I bought my house in 2000 when they offered me all these different loans, and I said, why would I even consider such a thing? Give me a 30-year fixed. I can afford that. why would I even consider this? I thought it was not right back then. Couldn't believe they were offering it to me. So I'm not against smart regulation, and if you're providing smart regulation, I'm for
We're
it.
providing
like
very smart and very tough regulation, and it's the only answer, whether you're dealing with the oil industry, whether you're dealing with the banks, you're dealing with student lenders, because these people have been ripping off hardworking families in this district and all across the country. And yes, it's tough regulation to put in place, and it may not be perfect, but look what happened under the existing system to families all across this country in terms of their loss of wealth. Trillions of dollars. And if you're 50, 55 years old, where do you go to replace that? And that's why the economy is suffering, because people are very cautious. But to suggest that you're just going to stand on the sideline and maybe cherry pick a few things here in healthcare, a few things in financial regulations, is just an outrage, because these are huge, huge systemic problems that were existing that drove this economy down and damn near took the international financial system down around the world.
And that's not a part where we disagree. We need regulation, but I want to see government in the role of referee, not telling me what to do when I'm doing this. And when you look at these regulations...
Nobody's telling you what to do. We're just providing the information, so when you buy a credit card, you'll know what your penalties are going to be, you know what the interest rate's going to be, and people can't arbitrarily change that without informing you. That's regulation.
Good. Let's move on to an international question with respect to the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Congress passed a $32 billion supplemental funding bill, and I believe you voted against it. And you have recommended the creation of a study group to study strategies in the Middle East. You have supported war funding in the past. You've changed your mind now. Why did you change your mind? And what's a quick assessment of where we are in Afghanistan? I know you've traveled there.
Well, I think a quick assessment in Afghanistan is that the elements for success are simply not present. We're dealing with a corrupt government, and that government is going to remain corrupt. We're dealing with the armed forces and the police in Afghanistan that are corrupt, and they're going to remain corrupt.
So do we just get out?
And let me finish.
Yeah,
and we've spent billions of dollars. We've spent $1 billion of reconstruction. The reconstruction projects haven't been completed. We're not getting help from the neighbors. We're not getting help from India, from China, from Russia, from Iran. And what are they doing? They're watching America bleed. They're watching their soldiers bleed. They're watching the Treasury bleed. And they're coming in and saying they want to deal with the economics of it. They want to go to copper mining. They want to build hydroelectric dams. They want to do this while American soldiers pay the price to guard those investments. Why don't they help us out with a very serious problem? So if the elements for success aren't there, I can't vote to send young men and women of this country to that front, because it simply is not workable. I've been there several times. I've talked to the presidents and to everybody else, to the generals, over and over again, and the same things they tell us today, they were telling us 8 years ago, they were telling us 4 years ago, they were telling us 3 years ago, and it was McChrystal that said this is a bleeding ulcer. And I think we owe the armed forces of our nation more than that. There's a way to deal with this. We've been attacked 3 times. The Christmas bomber, the Times Square bomber. We didn't send in 150,000 troops to Yemen or to Somalia. No, what we've done is we've sent in covert operations. We've sent in drones. We've went to those governments and said, if you don't turn the people over to us, we're going to hold you responsible for that. And so the policy has already changed, but these soldiers are stuck in Afghanistan with an old policy that cannot succeed.
Mr. Tubbs, if you were in Congress, what would you advocate the U.S. do in Afghanistan right now?
Thank you,
Just
Lisa.
keep sending money?
I am one of those troops that have been to Afghanistan. I've been to Iraq in my flak vest, in my NVG helmet, flying C-17s and C-5s into those areas. I'm the one putting my life on the line for these policies that are out there. I have friends that haven't made it home. I have taken them home in boxes on my airplane. I, among anybody, understands the sacrifice we're making over there. On 9/11, we had to respond. Now, what we've done, I think, as a Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Air Force, I don't know what victory looks like. I don't, and that concerns me. When we look at Afghanistan, what is victory? We just pulled our troops out of Iraq, our combat troops. What is victory? That disturbs me as a Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Air Force. I want it defined by my Commander-in-Chief, and it's not. So what is victory in Afghanistan? But just pulling out is not the answer. And when you voted against the funding for the troops, I mean, I had images of the people at Valley Forge wrapping their feet, bloody feet in the snow. We need support from our Congress, and if I'm in Congress, I will support the troops. I will look to my president to establish the policies to make it happen the right way, but I'm not going to remove my support for the troops, and I would vote for them.
It's a question of whether or not you're going to continue to put the troops in jeopardy for a cause that doesn't exist, for a result that's unreachable. And I think you owe them better than that. And we gave the president an opportunity. He laid out his plan. It simply is not working. And one of the reasons it's not working, because after 9/11, when I voted to respond into Afghanistan, we responded, and then we went to a war of choice in Iraq. And we all know this terrible, terrible history of that, and the thousands of military personnel that were killed and injured in Iraq. And now somehow you want to pretend you can make it all good again. I just don't think that's the case, and I think we owe the military more than that. And you can always cloak this in, well, you're not going to support the troops. Well, then let's make a decision about whether we're leaving or not. And just as that said, we would not put that money forth, but we would use it for withdrawal and for force protection of those troops while we're withdrawing, just as we did as we're drawing down in Iraq now.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, and I'm so sorry. This could have gone on for some time. Really appreciate both of you being here. It was a great discussion. We are now, unfortunately, we didn't even begin to cover the major issues, but each candidate will now have 2 minutes for a closing statement, and we're going to hear from the candidates in the reverse starting order. And we're going to begin with Mr. George Miller, the incumbent Democratic congressman.
Well, thank you, Lisa, very much, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for this opportunity to ask my constituents to return me to Congress so that I can continue my service to our community and continue to work on behalf of the families and their children that I represent. And I bring to that request for support for my candidacy a record of accomplishment, a record of integrity, a record of independence. I've worked very hard at this job because I feel that I have a very strong obligation to the people of the 7th District. And it's what I do every day. I get up and I work hard on behalf of hardworking men and women and their children who are trying to make it in this economy, who are trying to educate their children. And I have not been afraid to take on the very difficult battles. I took on the battles to take $62 billion away in wasteful subsidies to the banks so that those monies could be used to recycle the cost of education, of higher education, for families by making lower interest rates, by lowering the cost of the loans, by increasing the Pell Grants so families know that they'll be able to educate their children when it comes time for them to go to college. I worked hard to provide jobs to rebuild this economy after the outrageous financial scandals of the banks and of Wall Street. We're providing new jobs in renewable energies and the new energy fields of the future, and to protect the jobs of teachers and firefighters and health workers in our local communities. And we're trying to work on a policy that we make this in America when we have new energy, when we have transportation bills, that the pieces of that are made in America to put people together and working in America. I've also been willing to take on the big banks with the financial reform bill. I've been willing to take on the healthcare insurance industries and to reform that so people have access to affordable health insurance. And never again, whether it's an economic downturn, whether it's a loss of their job, whatever their circumstances, never again will they lose their health insurance. They will have that security for themselves, their families, and their children. Never again will they be denied health insurance because of a pre-existing conditions. So those are the opportunities that we have. We have the opportunities to go forward in America, not go back, as so many Republican leaders in Congress have said, just to go back to the exact same agenda that we had before that created so much of this problems, whether it was oil drilling in the coast or the financial scandals on Wall Street. And I hope I can have your support, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr.